Bellator 149 hosted one of the most ridiculous fights I think I've ever seen between Kimbo Slice and Dada 5000, and it has now been stated that Kimbo Slice and Ken Shamrock actually failed a drug test. Now, this poses a lot of conversation surrounding the fight because, for one, every single article ran this fight is the most stupidest fight anyone's ever seen. That is how people describe the fight between Kimbo Slice and Dada 5000. Now, the reason why this is brought up now is because, one, obviously, he failed a drug test, but two, Dada 5000 had to go to hospital because his heart had stopped. Now, he had some heart palpitations. He had to go to hospital. They initially thought it was just through fatigue from the fight because he looked exhausted, man. He barely could even stand. Kimbo, of course, knocked him out and won that fight. But then it's found out that it was because his heart had stopped. I don't know if it was either in the hospital or at a certain point. So obviously worrying times. He's now stable. He was in intensive care at one point. I'm not relating the fact that Kimbo had failed that drug test to this. I mean, he suffered fatigue, which means to me that he was either not in good enough shape to handle or there wasn't enough tests being done. I don't want to state anything off the cuff, but still, it doesn't bode well for Kimbo Slice, the fact that this guy had almost died at one point through a fight that was involved with Kimbo Slice, who failed a drug test.
Right. So a couple things. One, regardless of this, ahead of this being one of the dumbest fights we've ever seen in any kind of MMA history, it was the most viewed in Bellator history. It was 1.9 million viewers were drawn, and the average 2.5 million viewers during the actual that fight itself at its peak. So 2.5 million people watched a 42-year-old fight a 52-year-old.
Yeah.
Dada 5000 being the 52-year-old. Yeah, man. Like, what do you think is going to happen at that age? I'm not calling 52 old. I'm calling it old for fighting.
Yeah.
For mixed martial arts. And these guys were retired anyway. By the way, the video, which we can show you a little bit of here.
Pero no tiene el suficiente poder para noquearlo, haciendo un esfuerzo superhumano. Ahí lo tiene, se está cayendo, otra vez, se va a caer. Oh my God, no es posible, y se acabó.
They're not lifting their arms.
They're
both. It was the slowest. It was the slowest type of fight action I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah.
Yet I'm still one of those 2.5 million people who's sitting at the TV going,
It's because
what is happening right now?
What you know about Kimbo Slice, right, is that he's dragging over the exact same audience, which was me and you, who watched his career on YouTube of those backyard brawls. Because that's what this was. This was just a backyard brawl. Yes, technique.
But there was but there was at least action in a backyard brawl. No, this was. I mean, Francis, we're talking like, here, come here.
I mean, I still wouldn't want to take one of a sluggish Kimbo Slice's
limp-armed.
punches.
Oh my God.
Nonetheless, what was the actual?
So where was the steroids in this? Because if you think that they'd be actual,
I think it was just to get through the rounds that they had to get through. I'm not sure what. It doesn't seem like it helped at any point. I mean, he did win the fight, but I admit, when you're watching it from outside, right, you're watching the fight, it looks like they're throwing these heavy-armed, weak punches that are just landing because they're just so tired. But you never know, man. One of those punches, just with the sheer weight of Kimbo Slice's arm, could probably knock you clean.
Both men have been administratively suspended by the Texas Department of Licensing and Relegation, pending an adjudication process. Sources said the official test results documents showing the exact substances Slice and Shamrock tested positive for haven't been withheld by the TDLR due to potential pending litigation. Athletes on the card had urine samples taken before their bouts, so likely didn't find out till after.
So Jason, the Deadspin article, we did some research here and it stated that both Shamrock and Kimbo Slice had failed the drug test before the fight took place. Now, that being said, it's not clear whether they were just tested before and then found out after, or even so, how many times does this happen where the fighters are tested before and then we find out the results after they fought? Why are they not being tested in advance so that we know that this is happening? Well, it's a cloudy situation. I'm not a medical expert or a fighting expert in this situation, whether it affects someone if they're tested before a certain date, but nonetheless, if you're testing them the day or whatever before, or before the fight actually happens where a urine sample's provided, how are you even going to know after the fight happens? And that's what I'm stating to the Bellator here, is that they could be in some serious hot water because a man who was on the receiving end of someone who was using performance-enhancing drugs nearly died.
Once the news breaks, we find out. It's a matter of when did they know? When did they get the results? When did they actually find out?
Yeah.
Right? And two, in terms of like the drug testing policy, at least from like the UFC standpoint and their testing policy, which is very likely different from Bellator and other rings of MMA at least, but UFC really ramped up their game when it came to drug testing, and Bellator should follow. They get tested periodically throughout usually training and stuff like that, but it doesn't seem like they fail when they do fail until the ones that are most recently before the fight, and the only logical conclusion I can come to for that is they're trying to beat the system.
How many times have we seen John Jones in the UFC fighting against Cormier? It's after the fact that he gets tested positive for cocaine use, and you're like, well, that comes into consideration because did they test him in advance? Did they test him right before the fight? And it seems like you're becoming it devalues the fight as a whole, because you watch it and you're like, this is fucking awesome, and then after it you're like, well, how much of what actually happened was a result of what he was taking? Like, was he amped up on this? Was he amped up on that? And again, I'm not expert on what certain drugs do to certain people, but in fights like this, you just want a fair playing field, and you don't want to see people get nearly fatally hurt like what happened there, because it's not been proven, but it could have been a result of the fact that Kimbo's punches might be holding a little bit more weight, although I'm positive that any punch from Kimbo Slice would still cause some serious damage.
Nothing was nearly as bad as Dada 5000's haircut.
That's pretty rough.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, hit us in the comment section below. Let us know what you think of this fight. Do you think this is putting Bellator in hot water? Do you think that it's got Kimbo Slice in hot water? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. TYT Sports on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube. Subscribe goes a long way. Thanks again. See you soon.